Hello, I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for downloading this episode of Philosophy Talk. Your support helps keep Philosophy Talk on the air and online.
We appreciate your support.
And as always, thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're coming to you from the studios of KALW San Francisco.
Continuing conversations that began at Philosopher's Corner on the Stanford campus.
Today, utilitarianism, the concept that it's right to do what results in the greatest good for the greatest number.
So, Ken, that makes utilitarianism an ethical theory, a theory about what one morally ought to do, about what makes acts right and wrong. So, as an ethical theory, what's so special about utilitarianism?
Well, the most distinctive thing about it is that it's what philosophers call a consequentialist theory. It's a form of consequentialism.
Oh, well, thanks for clearing that up. What in the world does that mean?
Well, look at the way I formulated it, John. An act is right if it results in the greatest good for the greatest number. You do something, and as a result of what you do, in combination with the circumstances in which you do it, things happen. Those are the consequences of what you do. And for utilitarianism, the rightness or wrongness of your act depends on and entirely on those consequences, hence consequentialism.
Well, I don't know about that. My grandmother always told me, let your conscience be your guide. Now, your conscience is inside of you. And it tells you what to do prior to your doing anything. I guess my grandmother was a non-consequentialist.
Well, I guess she was. And, she had good company, like Immanuel Kant. He thought it was the nature of the intention of an action, which precedes the action, not the consequences that make it right or wrong.
Okay. So we're going to talk about utilitarianism, and that's consequentialist, and I know what that means. But I still think there's some big issues with the way you define utilitarianism.
So what are those, John?
Well, utilitarianism, you say, is do the greatest good for the greatest number. There's two obvious questions. What's good and number of what? Start with the second question. Number of humans, just existing humans, or do ones that have yet to be born need to be taken into account? And if it's not just humans, why should it just be humans? How about toads? How about horses and dogs?
Well, you asked some excellent questions there, John. Look, maybe the greatest good for existing humans would be one big, long, ecology-destroying party. But then if we take future generations or maybe all other animals into account, the utilitarian calculation would be quite different in those two cases.
Okay, and how about the other question? What good are we talking about? Pleasure? Philosophical insight, happiness, wealth?
Another great question. Yeah, you're full of great questions today, John. The founder of utilitarianism, the English philosopher Jeremy Bentham, pretty much took the good to be simple bodily pleasure. But the most persuasive utilitarian, his godson John Stuart Mill, said that wasn't right, and I think Mill was right about that. There were higher and lower pleasures.
Okay, that's all coming back to me, right? Mill was the one who said it was better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Well, Ken, looks like we got plenty to discuss.
And we'd like our listeners to join in this discussion. The number is 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Or you can email us at comment@philosophytalk.org.
We'll get started by examining the essence of utilitarianism, the arguments for it, and the different types of utilitarianism.
Then we'll see where utilitarianism leads us if we decide to live by it when we consider civil liberties, animal rights, the environment, abortion, and other ethical issues.
Finally, we'll look at the objections to utilitarianism, especially the problem of rights. For example, no matter how many people may benefit from convicting a certain innocent man, if you're on the jury, it still seems wrong to vote for conviction if you know he's innocent.
But first, our roving philosophical reporter, Julie Napolin, jumps right into the question of whether animals should be brought into the utilitarian equation. She files this report.
When most people use the word utilitarian, they mean something really functional, like a good piece of furniture.
It is almost a put down. It basically means, it gets the job done, but it's nothing more than that. It's not very nice or it's unpleasant.
Stephen Hansen teaches philosophy and bioethics at the University of Louisville.
That's not entirely inconsistent with utilitarianism, but it isn't what the word originally was meant to mean. The notion of utility basically meant social good, and we must, if we're going to be good people, consider that across the whole of society.
And when utilitarians say the whole of society, they don't only mean people.
There is not a qualitative distinction between humans and animals in utilitarian theory. Just like there isn't a qualitative distinction between humans and animals on the standard picture of evolution.
Animals get included in the picture because utilitarian ethics are so strongly based in emotion and sensation.
If you're calling happiness one of the things that are good in the world, then it seems just obvious that you have to consider at least higher animals in the moral calculus. To consider animals as having moral standing under a utilitarian schema simply means the things that are valuable in humans are also valuable in animals insofar as those animals can have them.
As a whole, I think we still don't see farmed animals as having value, of having moral worth, of having the ability to suffer.
Kim Sturla is the founder of Animal Place, a sanctuary for rescued farm animals in Vacaville, California. After Hurricane Katrina, they rescued 2,000 hens from a factory farm. The chickens had never been out of a cage and didn't even know how to spread their wings.
They didn't use any of their space. They just clustered on top of one another because they never had space. And then I'll never forget one when they were all clustered together. But one was pretty bold after being there just a few days, or maybe a week. She went on the other side of the pen and she just did this sprint, flapping her wings and, clucking really loudly and coming back. And then another one would just jump straight up in the air and back down. And so they all of a sudden were experiencing that they could move.
Since founding Animal Place in 1989, Sturla's main goal has been to educate people.
I love giving tours out at the sanctuary. When the public comes, invariably I get the question, well, do they know their name? Well, of course they know their name. Running a sanctuary where it's not dogs and cats that we rescue, but it's pigs and cows and chickens and turkeys, those are individual species that the public generally doesn't have the opportunity to interact with. It does push the envelope to ask people to increase that circle of compassion, beyond your family, beyond your country, beyond your species, and really try to have compassion for all.
Stephen Hansen.
To pay attention to something that goes beyond the individual, to something that goes beyond me, is, I think, one of the hallmarks of moving from an egoistic way of thinking about things and moving to a moral way of looking about things. And once you've taken that step, then there are ripple effects all over the place.
There's not a pig alive that doesn't love a belly rub.
Animal Place is one corner of the world trying to realize the utilitarian dream of happiness for the whole.
What motivates me to continue is faith in humankind that we will change, that we'll see the beauty and the complexity of all species, and hopefully from that increased awareness have an increase of compassion. And of course the ultimate goal we're striving for is a change of behavior.
For Philosophy Talk, I'm Julie Napolin.
I'm John Perry. With me is Ken Taylor.
And our guest today is Wayne Sumner. He's professor of philosophy at the University of Toronto. He's author of The Hateful and the Obscene, Studies in the Limits of Free Expression. Wayne, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So, Wayne, give us a brief account of how you became so interested in utilitarianism.
Well, I was always interested in ethics, at least when I started doing philosophy. And I was a bit dissatisfied with the way in which ethics was being done back when I was in grad school, which was all the way back to the 1960s. Because I thought that ethics really ought to be practical and ought to have something to say about real problems in the real world. And as the 60s wore on, those problems became more and more part of the public discourse, and it seemed to me a mistake for philosophy not to have anything to contribute to that discourse. So I started thinking about some of those issues, abortion, women's rights, other kinds of questions. And then I thought, well, I'm a philosopher, and philosophers like to sort of do things in a principled way. I really ought to have some sort of ethical principles or ethical theory to think about these things with. and started looking around and decided, well, utilitarianism and I are suited to one another. We're simpatico. We're on the same wavelength. So that became my sort of organizing framework for thinking my way through the practical problems that I wanted to try to deal with.
Well, Wayne, you sound like a real good person for me to ask this question, which is good since you're our guest for today. I just don't see what's plausible about utilitarianism. Now, it's not because I find any other ethical theory particularly problem-free, but I mean, it's an interesting property of an action that it does the greatest good for the greatest number of something or other. But why does that make it right or wrong?
Well, I thought that you captured one of you, I can't remember which one it was now, captured this fairly nicely earlier on with the idea of consequentialism. That what really matters when you're making decisions is the impact of your choices, the impact of your actions on the world. I can't imagine what could matter more, because this is what matters to other people, the people that you're impacting on. And so from my point of view, if you're trying to decide what to do or trying to do the right thing, that's the first thing you've got to look at. What difference will it make in the world, the choices that I make? What sort of, how can I make the world a better place? How can I make it go better?
Well, but Wayne, I mean, I think it's important. The consequences of your actions are, no doubt they're important. But, I mean, do I really, in deciding what to do, have to calculate all the consequences of my action? I mean, first of all, can I really know all the consequences of my action? I mean, the actual real-world consequences of my action? I mean, that seems like a very demanding moral theory you got there.
Yeah, it is demanding. I mean, it's certainly demanding in that respect. It's informationally demanding. You've got to know a lot. And, of course, you can't know all of that. Many times you can't know all of that. So you often have to go with the best evidence you have, make the best decisions on the basis of the evidence you have, and so on. Can you ever know everything that will result from your action? Yeah, I think in many cases you can, because in many cases the salient consequences, the ones that matter the most, are ones that are accessible to us. But I don't want to downplay how demanding it can be. But then I always thought that ethics is pretty demanding. This is where the demandingness of utilitarianism lies, at least one of its there.
I guess I want a less demanding ethical theory. I guess I'm just a schlop or something. I don't know. But let me press you a little bit on this point,
Sure.
Just a little bit further. So look, let's distinguish between the actual consequences of my action, the actual real world consequences, and the ones that I can reasonably foresee. I mean, what am I held responsible for? The foreseeable consequences of my action, according to the utilitarian, or the actual consequences?
Well,
Suppose some of the actual consequences are really bad, but they weren't foreseeable by me.
Right. If the question is strictly that, what am I held responsible for, I think the answer has to be the foreseeable or the reasonably foreseeable consequences. This is the way the law operates. After all, if some bad consequences of your actions are completely foreseeable by a reasonable person, you can't be held responsible for them. So I think that's the right answer on that side. But if you're asking the question, well, what actually makes your decision right or wrong? It turns out to be the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. I think it has to be the actual consequences. So you can, with the best of intentions and on the best of information, make a perfectly reasonable choice, but totally unforeseeable consequences can make that turn out to be the wrong thing to have done. I think that's a distinction between what we can be held responsible for, or we can be expected to do, and the way things turn out that most people really do resonate to.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today we're discussing utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number, with Wayne Sumner from the University of Toronto.
Ethics is one part of philosophy that has lots of practical implications, from our treatment of animals to our responsibilities to future generations of humans. In the next segment, we're going to dig into the implications of utilitarian doctrines for real issues. Join us by calling toll-free 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917.
Everyday morality, utilitarianism, and your calls and emails when Philosophy Talk continues.
Oh, you just keep on using me until you use me up.
Should we use it all up? Suppose you want to dam up a river that goes through my property and your deed gives you the right to do so. Should you also consider the effect on others? What others? Your neighbors? The animals whose environment you will affect? The whole ecosystem? Everyone who ever will exist and be affected, no matter how slightly by your action? Would anyone ever do anything if they had to be convinced that it provided the greatest good for the greatest number? It's utilitarianism this week on Philosophy Talk, and I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. How did you make your last moral decision that you faced? Are you a utilitarian or something else? Do you follow your conscience? Do you follow the Word of God? The toll-free number, 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Or email us at comments@philosophytalk.org.
Our topic is utilitarianism, and our guest is Wayne Sumner from the University of Toronto.
So, Wayne, Peter Singer and other utilitarians have thought that it has clear and important consequences for our treatment of animals. Explain the thinking here, and do you agree with it?
I do agree with it. In fact, I was convinced by Peter Singer about that issue, so I became a vegetarian myself. I think the line of argument is pretty straightforward for utilitarians, because once they've taken the view that what matters is individual well-being, what matters is enjoyment, suffering, pleasure, pain, happiness, however one characterizes it, then it yields a very simple and direct answer to the question of who matters. If you know what matters, you know who matters. And the things that matter are the things that have what matters. So if animals are capable of pleasure, pain, enjoyment, suffering, happiness, and so on, they have to matter as well. And that complicates our moral decision-making a whole lot, but it seems to me it's just irresponsible to simplify by eliminating them from the equation completely.
Do all things that suffer pleasures and pains matter equally? Do all pleasures and pain count the same? The pain of a worm versus the pain of a human being?
Well, Singer's answer to that question, which I think was the right answer, is equal pleasure counts equally, regardless of whose it is. Of course, that raises the much more difficult question of when are pleasures equal, or when are individual bits of well-being equal, as between animals and others. And that's I think a very difficult question to answer. But one way to think about it is to compare non-human lives and human lives in terms of the kinds of well-being they're capable of. So basic issues like physical pleasure, physical pain, we share with all sentient animals, all vertebrate animals, for instance. But human beings are capable of other kinds of enjoyments or pleasure, aesthetic ones, intellectual ones, and so on, that animals are not. So if it comes down to a choice between a human life and a non-human life, I think usually we're justified in thinking the human life counts for more. But it's not because each individual constituent part of it counts for more. Equal benefit is equal regardless of whose it is, but we may just be capable of more benefits.
So let me ask you about a different category, and that's people that don't exist yet. Suppose my wife and I are planning to start a family, and suppose that for some reason or another, we know that if we do things a certain way, we'll have twins, and if we don't do them that way, we'll just have a single child. And suppose we know that if we have a single child, we'll have enough money to really give him a good life, but if we have twins, we'll have enough money and attention to give them okay lives. Now, if we were convinced that the sum of enjoyments that our twins would get throughout their life would add up to more than the sum of enjoyments our single child would get out through his or her life, should that really be the basis for our decision? In other words, is it better to have more sort of happy people than one really good happy people? How do we think about future generations?
Well, and first of all, we have to assume that future generations do count, and I think it's a straightforward implication of the theory that they have to count. We can't sort of draw some arbitrary line. If their happiness counts, then there are two different ways to make future generations happy. And one of them is to make the individuals that will live happier, and another is to have more happy people. And this has been a subject of much debate among utilitarians as to whether both of these ways are sort of equally good ways of producing happiness. I think in the case of the choice between single child and twins, the way that you sort of put it, I think, is a way that many people would actually sort of resonate to. And a slightly different way of putting it is this: if you go for the larger number of children, can you do the same for each of them as you could do for a single child? And if the answer begins to be, well, no, I mean their well-being would be quite adversely affected by just the multiplication of numbers, then that provides a good reason for cutting back. But if you can still give them decent lives, then it might actually be the better thing to do to have both of them rather than just the one.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking with Wayne Sumner about utilitarianism, the greatest happiness principle. We'd like you to join this discussion, 1-800-525-9917. And we've got a caller in the line now, Don in Sonoma. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Don.
Grace and peace, John, Kent, and Wayne. Listen, greatest good for greatest number, isn't this another way of justifying that the ends justifies the means? I mean, after all, if you're a consequentialist, you can fit into a confusion of ends and means.
Well, I think that's a very interesting question. I think these two are connected, but it's probably a little more complicated than the one just being another way of saying the other. The idea of the ends justifying the means, what we mean by ends there is a little ambiguous. People usually have in mind the person's goals, the person's intentions, long-range intentions. If they have a long-range intention to do good, then even if they have to do something that seems kind of smarmy on the way to doing it, that's okay. You can say, well, look, I'm the best candidate. It's really important for the country that I win the election, so I have to lie and cheat a little bit. That's okay. That's the ends justifying the means. I guess, in a way, that's a very consequentialist doctrine, but it's a doctrine about how a person's plan gets justified.
Thanks for the call, Don. So what do you think about that last question that we have? Is utilitarian just a way of saying that the ends justifies the means, or the means justify... Usually the end does justify the means, right? Or the means justifies the ends is what he wanted to ask.
Well, I don't know. I think of it as the ends justifying the means. I guess, first thing I think of is, well, what could justify the means except the ends to which they are the means? Of course, it doesn't mean just any end will justify any means. So there has to be some sort of balance involved between the costs and benefits of the end and the costs and benefits of the means. But it is in a way just a kind of restatement of the basic idea of consequentialism.
Right. So how do I go about deciding then what I ought to do in the world? And is this a guide? Is utilitarianism a guide for me in acting in the world? And if it is, how do I deploy it? So I'm trying to decide whether it's right to do a certain kind of farming, or to help to prohibit abortions or whatever. All these help me think through a thick ethical issue in a utilitarian way.
Well, if it isn't a practical guide, of course, it's completely failed to live up to its own promise and its own intentions. I think of it as just being an application to individual ethical decision making of the sort of cost-benefit balancing that organizations, institutions, governments try to do all the time. So if you're faced with a difficult choice, you try to figure out, well, what'll happen if I do this? What'll happen if I do that? And how do I value these consequences? What are the values at play here, and what will overall or on balance turn out to be the best thing to do? And of course, it's fraught with uncertainty. It is in any setting at all. But I think cost-benefit decision-making or cost-benefit balancing is something we're all familiar with.
Okay, now that's very good, and it makes a lot of sense. But the thing is that we had these basic questions in our intro. Good, what is the good, and who counts? Now, in a corporate setting or a government setting, these may be kind of answered for you, right? Maybe it's the stockholders or the stockholders and the customers, or maybe it's the people in the electorate.
Yep.
And maybe the good is, kind of determined by fairly measurable things. But for a personal individual like me, who counts? Do all the animals count, like our roving philosophical reporter interview suggested? Do future generations count? Is it better if I do something that produces 12 billion sort of happy people rather than something that would lead to a world with only 4 billion really happy people? How do you answer those questions in your version of utilitarianism?
Well, you got a lot of questions there, so let me try to work through them. First of all,
well, take the easiest one first.
Okay, let's start with what counts, right? What matters? For utilitarians, it's always been happiness or pleasure. I think these are various ways of trying to capture the idea that what matters is how people's lives are going, or how individual lives are going. Let's not keep it confine it to people necessarily. So it's a good thing when a life goes well. It's a bad thing when it goes badly. A life goes well when it's rich or rewarding or enjoyable, or however you want to parse that, or happy. So that tells us what we're looking for, and trying to sort of size up consequences or decide which way to go. That's the value that we're looking for. Trying to produce happiness and avoid unhappiness, produce pleasure, avoid pain, whatever. But if you've answered that question that way, it also tells you who matters, because there's no way to stop short then of including everyone or everything that has the capacity for that kind of good. So if animals can be happy or unhappy, can suffer or enjoy life or whatever, then they've got to count as well.
Wow, that's pretty demanding. Anything that has any well-being, can have
Right.
well-being at all, has to count in my calculus. I wonder what our listeners think of that. This is Philosophy Talk. We're talking about utilitarianism with Wayne Sumner from the University of Toronto. We'd like you to join our conversation, 1-800-525-9917. And Dave in Berkeley's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Dave.
Yeah, great. I love your show.
Well, thank you. We love you too, Dave.
Yeah. No, I've read Bernard Rosen on ethics, and what he does, he takes all of these different ethical forms like consequentialism, situationalism, and also, you know, the Aristotle's golden mean, and sort of puts it together in an what I would call an intuitional cowcatcher, so that you're like with the dialogues with Sartre, you know, when they ask him about his mother, whether he would help his mother or join the army. So it's up to each one of us, sort of in an intuitional cowcatcher, to use all of these different forms.
So Dave, what's
to make a particular decision every moment?
Dave, what's the best thing for us to read by Bernard Williams?
Yeah, that was Rosen, I think.
Rosen, yeah.
Oh, no, I'm
Bernard
sorry.
Rosen, yeah. I think I forget the title of the book.
Well,
look up Bernard Rosen.
Okay, Google Bernard Rosen. A suggestion from Dave.
Yeah.
But now, thanks for the suggestion, Dave. Wayne, I want to get back to every creature who can experience pleasures and pains or have a sense of well-being or something.
Yes.
Matters.
Yes.
That's really demanding.
Of course.
That's really demanding. I mean and first of all, I wanted to tell you something.
Yeah.
Some creatures just don't matter to me as much as others. I mean, my children matter, my family matters, my country matters, but they don't matter. The worms, I don't know if worms count. Monkeys don't matter nearly as much to me as human beings. Am I justified in at least having a mattering map in which some creatures matter more and other creatures matter less?
Well, I think it would be very odd if we didn't think that was justified. As far as other creatures are concerned, I mean, what we can do roughly to sort of map what they're capable of against what a human life is capable of. So certain basic capacities, like the capacity for physical pleasure, physical pain, we certainly share those with a great many other creatures, virtually every vertebrate animal, for instance. But we have other capacities that they don't have, capacities for aesthetic enjoyment, capacities for intellectual enjoyment, and so on. So you can think of us as being sort of, basic animals plus. And I think that's enough to suggest that other things equal, if it's a human life as opposed to a non-human life that's at stake, we're generally justified in preferring the human life. But we're doing that simply on the basis of a kind of calculus, how much there is in it.
So can you tell me how many pig pleasures are worth one human pleasure? I mean, it sounds like human well-being is more important than the well-being of pigs or monkeys or worms. But can 1,000 worms equals one human? Does it work like that?
Are you asking me that?
Yeah, I'm asking you that.
Let me put it this way. I think that if we're sizing up the way in which we're treating animals, what we want to do is to ask ourselves, what are we imposing on them? What kind of suffering are we imposing on them? And that's usually what we do. And what are we getting out of it? And I think if the answer on our side is something fairly trivial, like, say, the pleasure of eating their flesh, and the answer on their side is something fairly substantial, like death or extreme suffering, then it comes out on their side.
So Wayne, let me ask you a question that can combine several issues.
Sure.
So let's consider eating meat, eating beef.
Yep.
There are at present throughout the U.S. Millions and millions of cattle. Maybe, I don't know how many million. I've spent a fair amount of time on farms and ranches, and I must say that on the whole, their life looks pretty pleasant, unless I'm really wrong about what a cow wants out of life. However, at the end of life, they have a really terrifying experience, followed by death. Now, I don't know how the utilitarian gets to count death as a bad thing, but certainly the experiences that lead to death could be a bad thing.
Yeah, I think
now, I think it would be better to not have this bad 2 weeks, but I still think on balance, your average beef on the hoof has a reasonably good life, followed by a bad experience, followed by death. But so I think on the balance, their lives are good. Now, if we quit eating beef, we won't have millions of cows.
Mm-hmm.
they'll just disappear as a species. They'll be like buffalo, a few of them kept around so kids can see what their parents used to eat.
That's right.
Now, how should I think of that? We'll have fewer experiences,
Yeah.
and on the balance, fewer good experiences.
Yep.
So how do I think about future generations, in particular, future generations of cows?
Look, I actually agree with a lot of what you just said. I've spent time on cattle farms myself, and as long as they're extensive farms, and most cattle farms are, those creatures seem to be leading pretty good lives. It's bad at the end, as you say. There are, and when you ask yourself, well, then, what about those lives, and isn't it better that we support those lives rather than stop eating meat and they just die out? That gets pretty complicated, because I think the only satisfactory answer to that, and I think utilitarians have tended to focus more on the suffering side. Some have worried more about the loss of life and the impact of death on the animals. Actually, my concern is mostly with the suffering. So my concern is largely with factory farming and the conditions under which intensive farming takes place. I'm not so concerned about the lives of cattle in extensive farms. But if you're actually asking yourself, well, is it better to be raising millions of cattle rather than using that land for something else? Then I think the argument shifts into more ecological concerns. What would be best for the world at large, including us?
Yeah, I should have.
We make of that land.
I should have made the question about chickens, because chickens are ecologically about as good a way of getting stuff into protein as you can. But I think Ken has a call.
Yeah, we have a caller in the line right on this point. Bruce in Piedmont. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Bruce. We'll take your question and then we'll answer it after the break.
Okay, well, I just wanted to make the comment that another way of looking at utilitarianism is simply enlightened self-interest. And what's good for me, I want to look at, my connection to my society, my connection to the environment, my connection to future generations, that helps me. So my enlightened self-interest, I don't have to worry about doing the right thing for some sort of moral brownie points so much as it's going to help me in the long run.
Bruce, you're asking a good question, and we're going to return to it after the break, because I think a question of how far our well-being extends and what counts as part of that, we'll dig into that a little more after the break. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're discussing utilitarianism with Wayne Sumner from the University of Toronto.
Do you think it's always right to do what produces the most good for the greatest number? When you take an action, do you sit around and think about the interests of people in far-off countries or future generations or cows and chickens? Or do you just mainly focus on what effect it will have on you, your children, your wife or husband, and your neighbors? Should you do it the way you do or some other way? These are the issues we'll talk about in the next segment.
Utilitarianism and its alternatives, plus more of your calls and emails when Philosophy Talk continues.
Happiness runs, happiness runs in a circular motion. Thought is like a little butterfly.
How important is happiness really? I mean, if something makes you happy but harms others, is it still a good thing? The greatest good for the greatest number. Utilitarianism. That's what we're talking about. I'm John Perry. This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. Our guest is Wayne Sumner from the University of Toronto. Wayne, I want to go back to our last caller's question, which I think actually got something deeply wrong about utilitarianism. He said, you can view all this well-being of others as part of your own well-being, but actually, in utilitarianism, your well-being can be kind of sacrificed for the well-being of others. Here's a case. Imagine there's a really fit guy who's a bit morose, but he's a fit guy. He's not too happy, but he's completely fit in the doctor's office. And in the 5 rooms next to him is a guy who needs a heart transplant, a kidney transplant, another kidney transplant, another guy needs a liver transplant, and I don't know if they transplant lungs. But so the 5 organs. And these guys are all, if they got the organ, they would live great productive lives. And the morose guy would go on being morose. On the crudest form of utilitarianism, it seems to me like it would be right to take the guy's life and donate his organs to these other people. That's not enhancing his well-being.
No.
So what do you think?
Well, I think, in general and in principle, certainly your well-being can be outweighed by the well-being of others. And so the basic idea behind utilitarianism, everyone counts for one. You just count for one among those others. As far as the actual example is concerned, it's a kind of, it's a frequently cited problem for utilitarianism. But I think some of these issues, the moment you start to sort of think about them practically and think about what the actual ramifications would be of sacrificing people as directly and crudely as that for the benefit of others, it actually really doesn't turn out to do the kind of good you think it's going to do. It turns out to be really a very risky, very counterproductive.
Wait a minute.
Practice.
Yeah, risky, counterproductive, all that. That's a way of trying to say the utilitarian can somehow account for the felt wrongness of this because it turns out to be risky and counterproductive. But it's not the risky and counterproductiveness of it that makes it wrong. It's that this guy has a right to his life and he's not a tool for the promotion of the well-being of the greatest good, for the greatest number. He's not a mere instrument of the body polity or whatever.
Yep, fair enough. And I have the same intuitions myself. But I just wanted to say that I think a lot of these examples tend to be a bit fanciful and not very realistic. So I'm much more concerned about much more sort of real-life examples in which we would do more good by violating somebody's rights, let's say. Others would benefit, and the cost wouldn't be that great. I think there are such cases, and in many such cases, it looks as though the right thing to do is to violate the rights. And
so I want to hear that, but let me just a note for our listeners. So here we've got to the crux of what a lot of people think is wrong with utilitarianism. They think that really ethics has a lot to do with people's rights, and you can't violate a person's rights just because it's going to do a lot of other people a lot of good. So Wayne, I want to hear what's your response to that objection. I know it's something you care deeply about because you published on it.
Yep, I do care deeply about rights, and for a long time I felt as though I was leading a kind of divided life, because on the one hand I was a committed consequentialist and utilitarian, and on the other hand I was someone who took rights seriously. I belonged to civil liberties organizations. I don't think people's rights should be violated, at least not except for very good reasons. And so the question was, well, can these two things fit together? And on the surface of it, it looks as though it's difficult to do that, because rights are kind of counter-consequentialist devices, right? The whole idea behind a right is that you should respect it, even if the consequences will be better if you don't. Otherwise, rights don't really mean anything. And I think that's absolutely right. I think that if there's a solution to this for a utilitarian, it goes back to a point that we were making earlier about the gap between the decision procedure that you want to use in thinking ethically and the actual consequences of your actions. And most utilitarians have taken the view that the best way to actually achieve the very goal they have as utilitarians is to adopt a set of rules, fairly strict rules, and abide by them in most circumstances. Not all. There'll be certainly situations in which violating the rules is justified, but they'll actually do better on the whole and in the long run if they confine themselves to respecting a set of rules, rather than simply routinely violating them whenever it looks as though that's the best thing to do.
Wayne, I could push you hard on this point, but I'm going to let some callers in here. 1-800-525-9917. We have Philip in Brisbane. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Philip.
Oh, thank you. I can't enter the conversation on a terribly sophisticated level, but my thought was that as far as the argument about the most good for the most amount of for the most amount of people, we could. Isn't that terribly relative and arbitrary? Because we can say that Hitler was evil because of his treatment of the Jews, and yet that was precisely our treatment of the Native Americans a couple of centuries earlier. And let's say in the state of Pennsylvania, those Indians which weren't exterminated, they were shipped off to concentration camps thousands of miles away from their home.
Philip, let me push your point this way and see if it's add-on. I mean, Wayne, you agree that not all sentient creatures are going to count as much. I mean, we're allowed to have differences in counting. Now, maybe, to this people over here, the pain of African slaves don't count quite as much. Counts, but not as much. And people over here, the pain of Jews and pleasures of Jews don't count quite as much. So if we allow that there's a variation in the calculus of what counts, then aren't we all into some deep relativism about this stuff?
I don't see how we can be into any deep relativism as long as we're working with human populations. I mean, we'd have to have some reason for thinking that natives or Jews or whatever group we want to feel free to oppress are less capable of leading rich or rewarding or satisfying lives, or less capable of happiness or whatever than the rest of us are. And as far as I can see, there's just never going to be any justification for that. So I think in this case, there's a fact of the matter about whether these people have to count equally. There's nothing that should lead us to think that by virtue of their race, for instance, or their ethnicity or whatever, they count less than the rest of us. So I don't think there is a relativism here at all. I think we should condemn equally the oppression of any groups, any human groups, regardless of whether we're the oppressors or the Nazis conveniently are the oppressors.
Yeah, just a factual point. The genocide of American Indians didn't end centuries ago. It ended almost at the turn of the 19th to the 20th centuries. A lot of the really big events were after the Civil War, and I think the caller has a good point. Americans seem to look at that somehow differently, qualitatively differently from the Holocaust, but I think utilitarianism has a point, namely they shouldn't.
Yeah, I think, but I don't know. I agree with you both that they shouldn't and Americans do, but I'm still not quite sure. Here's a utilitarian justification for taking native lands. They're going to do less with it than we could do. I mean, we will produce commerce and all good things from it, and they will let it lie fallow. So why shouldn't we?
Well,
it's not just a matter of their happiness, but of the global well-beingness.
Well, that's a case where the utilitarians of the late 19th century probably didn't see all the important facts, like the ecological devastation that is involved.
So, Wayne, one last comment, then we'll have to say goodbye.
Look, I think you guys have done a good job of both sort of touching on the strong points of the theory, what makes it attractive, but also raising the right kinds of skeptical doubts. And I think, for any kind of ethical theory, there are certain kinds of issues that it handles really quite nicely, where it produces sort of well-contoured results, the ones that accord with our intuitions, and then they all have sticking points. They all have places where they don't look as though they're doing it quite right. And utilitarianism does as well. And I think it's not easy to show in those cases that it's going to yield the right results or be the right way of going about things. I still think it's better than any of the alternatives.
Okay. On that note, I'm going to have to thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you.
Been a pleasure.
Our guest has been Wayne Sumner, professor of philosophy from the University of Toronto, author of The Hateful and the Obscene, Studies and the Limits of Free Expression. So, John, what did you learn today?
Well, I learned that our guest Wayne Sumner is an articulate and thoughtful person who gives utilitarianism about as good a case as it can get. My problem with utilitarianism is I don't find it very convincing, but I don't have any alternative that I find is convincing, so I just stick to the philosophy of language.
Yeah. I'm a big believer, part of me anyway, in rights, and that's always been the sticking point for me, is like, I find it hard to figure out what sets a limit on this utilitarian calculus. I mean, within their framework, but intuitively we say, look, you can't take my life just to promote the happiness of the world. I'm inviolable, and utilitarian doesn't really easily make room for that intuition.
Yeah, I mean, I think utilitarianism is clearly a right theory for lots of cases involving elected officials and corporations and so forth, but it's clearly the wrong theory when you get to certain issues of rights and I don't know.
I think you're right. It's a kind of social decision makers theory.
Yeah.
Right, not really a guide for an individual. John, there's this terrible pounding in my head. Give me an aspirin or a Tylenol or something, please.
You don't need a Tylenol, Ken. That's conundruming in your head.
And we have a caller on the line now.
Yes, it's Jim. Hello, Jim.
Hello.
Where are you calling from, Jim?
I'm calling from Copperopolis.
There's not such a place. Copperopolis? Where is that?
Well, it's where you would go if you wanted to mine some copper, which has been kind of a dying industry. So it's a ghost town out in the gold country in California.
So are you a copper miner up there in Copperopolis?
Not often. Only when I'm hunting for pennies in the couch.
So why don't you tell us about your conundrum?
So here's the conundrum, which is that I think I'm like most people. I enjoy a kitten, but I'm not too fond of old cats. And as you think about it, by any rational standard, it actually makes more sense if you just trade in your cats as soon as they grow out of the kitten stage for new kittens. So over the 15 years that you would normally spend just pumping money into an old cat, you would be giving 15 kittens a joyful first year of life that they otherwise wouldn't get. You would get 15 years of joyful kitten ownership. And, to my view, it's the greater good.
So you're advocating caticide or something.
No, we are
meowicide.
I think the background here is we have caticide.
Yes.
Unwanted cats get put to death. So let's look at Jim's proposal from a utilitarian point of view. So each year of cat ownership produces so much pleasure for the cat owners and so much pleasure for the cat. Now, Jim's testimony, and I, as a cat owner, I would go along with this, is that the first year is the most fun and most pleasurable for the cat owner. You see your little kitten exploring balls of yarn and learning about, you can play with them endlessly with little ribbons tied on the end of a string. And then it goes down gradually until towards the end of the cat's life, you're mostly paying vet bills and cleaning up hairballs. Right. Now, from the cat's point of view, of course, we don't know for sure, but it looks like it has a lot more fun the first year, and then it goes downhill. So it seems to me from a utilitarian point of view, you'd get 15 times maximal person pleasure times maximal cat pleasure, and you'd get a much higher number than 15 with this depressing on each. So
you could let's change this argument a little bit. Let's make it, I don't know, a person. Because I want to take the same, here you go. A person's life, well, there's a period of flourishing, and then there's a period of decline in which you're mostly paying medical bills and the person's getting grouchy and ungrateful and losing their memory and all this sort of stuff. Well, should you trade people in like this too?
Well, that's the Logan's Run scenario, but, that's not really the conundrum I'm after. Here
I'm just cause mutatis mutandis. This is argument by parity of reasoning. If you wouldn't do it for a person, what's the salient difference between persons and cats such that you would do it for a cat?
But let's think this through. Suppose the background fact were that we did actually have a kind of a cap on the human population. And so when there are too many 90-year-olds around, kids are just... put to death at birth until there's a vacancy. It's kind of like, a billet in a philosophy department.
Right.
Matter of fact, there's another analogy. Isn't it better that people like me retire so that some more people get a chance at being assistant professors? So, Jim's right. The situation with cats the present situation is one we wouldn't approve of with humans, but given that we've got it, isn't his solution the best?
So let me ask you a question, Jim. So you said it wouldn't be materially different. We already have to put down lots of cats. But I take it, do we think that the cat's life as a whole has any value either to us or to the cat? That's what I was trying to get at with the human beings. We think that a human life has a kind of intrinsic value even in its states of decline. You don't think cats their lives have either value to the cat itself or value to...
I think we've made that decision, as a culture. If it were cows in India, it's a whole other thing, right? But we put down cats at a fairly brisk rate, and I'm just saying it. I think it's almost inarguable that the greater good would be to give each cat a great year of life rather than have most of them get no life and a few of them live to grouchy old cat age.
I don't think we've solved this one, and as a matter of fact, as we've gone further along, I'm starting to waver, because here's the thing about a cat and its own ownership of its life: it doesn't do it. There is some there, but there's not much. Most animals don't have much conception of themselves as being spread out over time with an unfolding life, that they value all the stages of it. So maybe the utilitarian way is the only useful way to look at it. Maybe.
Well, it's been nice talking to you, Jim. Now, does Copperopolis have a superhero? It seems like it should with a name like that. Copperman, someone who goes out and saves cats and things like that?
I think the field is ripe to develop that concept.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Bye-bye.
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 If you have a philosophical problem or quandary that's affecting your work or your play or keeping you awake at night, John and I would be happy to lend an ear and maybe give you some sound advice.
Go to the Philosophy Talk website and poke the conundrums button with your mouse, or just send an email to conundrums@philosophytalk.org. Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University, copyright 2008.
Our executive producer is David Demarest.
Our production coordinator is Devin Strolovich. Daniel Elstein is our director of research. Lael Weiss is our webmaster. Also thanks to Zoe Corneli, Merle Kessler, Corey Goldman, and Mark Stone.
Philosophy Talk is sponsored in part by Powell City of Books, on the web at powells.com. Support also comes from the Templeton Foundation.
And from various groups at Stanford University, the Friends of Philosophy Talk, and the members of KALW San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed in this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders.
The conversation continues on our website, philosophytalk.org. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.